Hello everyone. My name's Mariam Umar and today I want to talk to you about what is quality and how should we build it in. A little bit about myself. I work as head of quality engineering at a fintech in London called Thought Machine. My entire career has been in the world of quality. I started off as a hands-on tester, moved into test automation, did a few years there, and then I actually decided to move into test management because I really enjoy setting up strategies and building up teams. And today I want to share with you a little bit about what I've learned so far on my journey and hopefully get some feedback in terms of what are the things you think could work or could not work. So here we go. So, what we will discuss is first, we will talk about what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and how do we get to start, how do we get started on improving quality. Then we want to talk a little bit about the metrics you want to select, which is one of my favorite topics, and then how important it is to evolve metrics based on what we learn. So, something you'll do or come across with when you're hired as someone as a in an organization as a quality engineer or a tester is that people you come in and people start saying to you, "Come in, can you please come in and fix quality? Our clients are really unhappy. We are unhappy with our releases. We keep missing deadlines. We have issues with our builds, or the tests that we're writing are not great. They don't help us catch issues early. So, what do you want to do to try and fix this?" Um, when people give you all these problems, what's funny is that you start seeing these strange incidents and you start thinking, these problems are so normal. Why are people not solving them? Problems of this are like, okay, QS are not involved in code reviews, or they're not involved in estimates when we're trying to determine how much we can do in order to sign up for release and so on. And what this does is that it actually creates a lot of stress for people in the QA space. We are actually asked to try and fit signing off a lot of features generally. I wouldn't say all organizations are like this. Um, Sign off a lot of features in a very short timeline. And when that happens, you have a lot of stress. There may be incidents coming in. You have to cater to an SLA. You want to make sure that it's all signed off. And when you start seeing this pattern, there's something I will talk about in a little bit, which will probably help you spread that stress or concern from the clients, as I'd like to call it, and help ensure that we are working as a big quality team. First things first, improving quality does not happen with the QA team only. This is something I'm sure a lot of you have come across with. Companies actually sometimes put all the responsibility on people who have the word quality or test in their job titles and ask them to do everything regarding this. What's important is improvements will really happen in this space when the message comes from the top down. And it's really important for your CEOs, CTOs, your exec team to actually talk about why it's important to have quality processes, quality engineering practices, and so on, and what's the value it delivers. Once you have that backing of support, it's really nice then to sit down and think about, let's just see where we are with the problem first rather than always starting to engineer it quickly. I've tried a lot of strategies in my various roles in trying to improve this, but I think the overall roadmap, which really worked for me in various organizations, was something I learned from this book called Leading Quality, which was written by Ronald Cummings John and Aves Pierre, and I'll talk a little bit about it here. First things first, it's really important to think about what is your vision of quality and what do you need to do to get there. When you're creating a vision statement, it's always important to think about how it relates to the company's vision statement. Next thing is to identify your stakeholders. Who are the people who are actually really interested to see the outcome of what you're going to work on? Then you want to identify what areas did we have the problems in. And then you want to define metrics, and then we will talk a little bit about why improving metrics is important as well. So this is the vision statement I came up with my team. Uh, I'll read it out. Assuring quality enables teams to drive for customer satisfaction at a sustainable pace. Assuring quality enables teams to drive for customer satisfaction at a sustainable pace. If you look at this statement has three parts to it. One is enabling teams. And this really talks about quality in your engineering practices. How do you ensure that? This could be from how you do code reviews, what do good tests look like, how are you actually doing sign off, what is the process there, can we automate this, how can we be efficient as an engineering team so that we are actually in a place that as soon as a change lands in our code base, we don't care when it goes out to production, because that's how happy we are with the number of automated tests and everything else we've done around it to ensure quality of that deliverable. The next one is customer satisfaction. This is really about quality of releases. What can we be what can we define as a green release? Is it the timeliness of the release? Is it the scope of the release? Is it how quickly we were able to resolve problems when we had issues during deployment and so on? And a lot of this is where you get customer satisfaction. They actually are either using your platform or you're deploying it for them, or the feedback they give to you, and you want to be in a position where you're actually getting feedback from them rather than getting incidents coming back from them. And the last piece is sustainable pace. This is really about quality of processes. So let's say a team has a sprint planning process in place. Um, what could work for one team may not work for another team, and it's really important to be open about this. I think this is the piece which we overlook the most. We start looking at doing test automation and then confuse that with quality, and it's just a subset of quality. Looking at processes is a huge part of how we are efficient. I would think now that I'm talking about this, I think a big part of quality is also about how efficient we are as engineering teams, as organizations, and it's really about how we deliver to the customer. The next thing is you want to look at who are your stakeholders, who are the people who are genuinely interested in helping to improve quality across the organization. And this, again, as I said earlier, comes down from the CEO, CTOs. You have your tech leads, you have your testing team, incident management team, release management team. It could be the teams engaging with your clients day to day. It could also be people like pre-sales and so on. Maybe the version of the product they're demoing to the client is not showing the products not showing the features they want to see and so on. So you want to make sure you're getting them engaged and trying to understand what is the problem that they are facing. And you should go out and ask them questions, mainly about, for example, if you're speaking to incident management, how do the customers know that the quality of the product is bad? Is it because they saw 10 critical issues in one part of the product, or 100 low issues in another part of the product? Then you also want to ask them, you probably want to work with the tech leads to try and understand, how do you know that we have too many escape defects? How can we reduce them? What do you think the code coverage is like? Do you feel like we have the right processes in place in terms of estimation and planning and analyzing maybe the defect triage process is wrong and so on? It's these types of open-ended probing questions you should ask these people to try and understand where are the real problems, and that will really help you prioritize what you can help improve first. This is something that has been taken from the State of DevOps report. If you've not read it, please go away and take a look at it. It will really help you understand what are the things you can look at in terms of trying to understand what a high-performing organization looks like. They've defined 4 areas. One of them is deployment frequency, and that's really about how quickly can you actually deploy to production and how frequently are you doing this. Then you want to look at lead time for changes. This is really about how often or how long it takes you to, say, fix an incident, or if there's a new feature request from the client, how often can you provide it to them. And then time to restore service, something under here could be practicing DRs, or if there's a critical incident, how quickly can you roll back, and so on, or if there's a loss of data, what can you do. And the change failure rate, so how many of the changes to production have actually caused a degradation to the users. What are the features that we may have added 10 more features, but if it makes your 10 most used user journeys slower, then what is that rate? Is that a good way of determining whether your software is performance or sorry, I am slurring, performant or not? I would recommend that you please go away and take a look at these and help these guide you to try and understand what areas you need to look at. So as I said, you need to ask the questions of your stakeholders. I read the State of DevOps report, and these are the types of areas, these are the areas I came up with in terms of what I needed to do in my current role to try and help improve quality. We talk about hiring. Hiring and the type of people in your QA teams has a big impact on what you need to do. If you want to talk about releases and release management, how do they get shipped? We want to talk about test automation in terms of whether you have good automation in place, whether the tests you write are of good quality or not. Then the actual product quality, what does the product look like? Is it exactly what the customer wanted or not? And in the end, process quality is also really important. As I said earlier, it's more about how efficient you are as a team, how are your communication styles, etc. For the course, for the rest of this talk, I will talk a little bit about releases and product quality and what we did to try and improve it. Number one was releases. If I talk about Thought Machine specifically, the company is about 7 years old now, and when they started initially, it was mainly about providing a product which could be used out there. But once it was there, we needed to add some discipline to how we were releasing to our clients. Not only for the clients, but even for ourselves, so we knew what client was on which version, and to help us be more sensible about our releases. We wanted to make sure we were publishing good release notes, we knew what features were being shipped, what testing was being done, and so on, and how quickly can we actually deploy. So these were the things we really looked at. Here are some of the things we've actually published over time with the release managing team, which has really helped us understand where we are with our product. Because Vault, which is a product of Thought Machine, is a deployable, we were starting to lose track of what versions were with which clients. So it was very important for us to provide this visibility, mainly because if I was going to sign off a patch, I should know that what other versions of Vault do I need to run my regression test suite against. And a table like this, which was a very simple table in Confluence, really helped us get there. The next one was, as you start scaling, you have multiple clients or multiple environments. How do you keep track of it? Of course, you can go onto the boxes and find out what version of Vault was there, but not everybody has that capability. So it was really easy to maintain this as well, so that people knew what version of Vault, which release candidate was deployed when, and on for which client. We maintain different environments for different clients internally, because each client may be at a different version, or they want specific features of the product and they don't want to upgrade, so on and so forth. So we maintain tables like this as well, for not only within engineering, but for people outside of engineering as well. And the last one, which we've started doing more recently, we actually send out a release status report every day. And this is regardless of when a release is in flight or not. It's really to enable the organization to know what version of the release is in progress at the minute, what patch releases are there, what's the scope of the release, how many features are at risk. It's really easy for us to see immediately if there are problems coming up, much before then we're actually going to take the release card. The next one, as I said, I'll brief on this a little bit. Process quality. So what are the things you can think about when it comes to process quality? The first one is feature sign-off process. You want to think about what who are the stakeholders involved in signing off your features? Um, do they actually get to see a demo of the feature? The next one is definition of done. You want to make sure that every team does have a definition of done, and that definition is actually um, valid as your product changes over time. You want to look at what code review practices you have in place. Um, how do you actually improve code reviews? How do you make them more efficient? How do you make sure that they're timely and so on? Then you also want to make sure there's a good defect management process. As soon as defects are raised, you don't want them to be stalled. You want to make sure they all have priorities and they are uh, planned into sprints very quickly. Then you also want to talk about estimation and make sure that estimation process works, where you're actually reviewing previous estimates after delivery and not only just estimating items that need to be delivered in the future. Then you also want to look at test automation practices. Again, all of these things are things I've learned over time. They may not be applicable to you, or they may be things in addition that you want to do in order to assess process quality. Test automation practices are really about does a good test look like, at what level do you want to write the test, do we have test duplicates, and so on. And finally, you want to make sure that everybody's writing acceptance criteria in a specific way. We have all the information available so that we can reduce the back and forth when we're trying to do sign off. Now we come to the most interesting part, which is also the most exciting part for me, selecting metrics. There's lots and lots and lots of metrics you can select. And I drew my inspiration from the book Accelerate and the State of DevOps report. I would really recommend, again, for everybody to go away and read it and try and understand what are the factors which have been found by observation over various types of organizations, which can help you improve the state of quality in your organization and the performance of your products. These are some of the metrics I've discovered over time, and I'll talk a little bit about some of them. First one I want to talk about is MTTG. This is mean time to green. And this is kind of specific to the organization I'm in. We basically don't see the dashboards of the customer. We have a product like, let's say, Microsoft Office for everybody. It's a deployable, it's on your machine. How it works on your machine is not something the engineer who wrote that product will see. So mean time to green is something we came up with, which was really to try and understand how long it takes us to go from a red build to a green build. And this will kind of help us dictate how long it may take us to resolve an incident. Because really it comes down to how well the code is documented, how easily can you actually find where the problem is, and try and resolve that problem. And it may not always be in times of an incident. It can also be when you're trying to add more changes or changing features and so on. Another one was percentage of flaky tests. We actually have a flake bot implemented at Thought Machine, which when it sees some tests failing, it actually runs those tests quite frequently and identifies that as flaky. You may have a fully automated test suite, but if 50% of those tests are flaky, then that's as good as having no tests at all. So it's really important to keep an eye on this, that the number of flaky tests, the percentage of flaky tests is actually low over time. Another one was build failures. How often do our builds fail? Because that's an indication of, yes, this is the speed at which we are getting commits into our master branch, but you want to also make sure that you are analyzing those failures quite quickly and what is causing those failures, because sometimes, especially as we move into the world of cloud, a lot of issues start happening because of the infrastructure we're in and not because of the code we're writing. So it's really important to try and identify these earlier on. Some more defects found in sprint versus escape defects. The idea is to try and move the problem left. And in order to do that, you want to try and find out how many issues did we find after the release was cut, as opposed to when the engineers were writing code. because this is also a good indication of how much in parallel do your testers and engineers work, and try and find out issues quite quickly in your process. Another one is, this is something I realized in one of my previous roles. Automation may not always be the answer to solving testing problems. Sometimes some features are designed in such a way that exploratory testing is actually where we find the most number of defects, rather than via test automation. Because if you have tests automated and they're passing all the time, then maybe they are not good tests at all, and they're not actually helping you determine if there's a problem, will it detect it or not. It could be because of the test data and so on. So it's really important to keep an eye on this one as well. Another one which is quite useful is build time. If it takes far too long for your builds to execute, then the feedback for the engineer is really long and they lose interest, and then that's how you actually um, start getting a lot of delays in trying to build your product. And last but not the least, is something which is more qualitative rather than quantitative, is team feedback. How do the teams feel about the products that they're building? Do they feel that the features could be more enriched? Do they feel like they don't have, maybe not using the right language to implement this tool, this feature, or they don't have the right platforms to test it and so on? Maybe they don't agree with how we merge and so on. It's really important to get that information as well. If you want to talk to me about the other metrics, in the interest of time, we can do that offline. Feel free to ping me. Here are some graphs which we did. This one actually shows us the first time when we actually had more than 1,000 builds in a day, which was a huge landmark for us as a company. And really it was good to see how long it took us to complete that build, which was under 9 minutes from it being queued to actually being completed. Again, we started having problems in terms of it would take us far too long to actually check in code to when it will be available in the environment. It went down from 40 minutes approximately to 5 minutes, and this is about 2 years ago. Again, it's really important to see these metrics because then you can help work with your teams. Test greenness is something which may be of concern for you, because here it says dev test greenness was 65%, whereas staging test greenness is 88%. How are we having devs not green, not so green? So dev environment is really where we use trunk-based development, and that's where our engineers are committing code all of the time. But our release sign-offs really happen in staging. Yes, it's important for all tests to pass in dev, but it's of utmost importance that all tests are mostly green in staging. Again, pre-prod is of a very low percentage, mainly because these pre-prod environments really just run the versions of Vault which are being used by each client. But the actual test passing should be on the client's actual pre-prod environments and not the ones which are hosted by us. This was another graph that I collected. One of the biggest challenges we had was about getting all of our tests automated, because we were spending a lot of time trying to run manual regression tests, and we want to reduce this. So this is something we produced over time, which was quite useful for the rest of the organization. This is where metrics went bad. In this page, I'm actually looking at our system, our service acceptance tests, and their coverage versus the number of defects per team. And I was thinking, okay, if you have too many defects in a team, maybe that's because they have fewer tests. But what this showed me was that the accounts in the workflows team had a large number of defects, but they still had a lot of tests there. So is it because they had the right tests or the wrong tests? So this metric was not very useful for me, so we had to scrap it. Feel free to actually modify your metrics is what I would say. Don't rely on what you have don't rely on the information that's easily available. You should always step back and think about what's the information that's useful and work on that. This is something which was far more useful. As I said, we wanted to try and move the problem left. We wanted to make sure that we were finding more defects during development versus defects found after cutoff versus PMAIs, which are post-mortem action items, which are an outcome of our incidents. As you can see, the team on the left is the one which had the most items coming out of incidents, and they had the least amount of issues being found in development. Whereas if you go further to the right, you can see a team where the dark blue shows that they were finding a lot of issues during development, which is not a bad thing. It's better to find issues during development or in-house rather than a customer reporting incidents, but they still had a small number of defects that were being found after cutoff and post-mortem action items. But again, this is a really good way of finding out what areas of your code base actually need um, more focus in terms of trying to shift the problem left. Is it because the environments are different? Is it because we're not writing enough tests? Is it because our tests are not correct, and so on? Another one which is quite useful, I manage this number of defects being found after every release that's in production. This is really what we find after a cutoff state, and you can actually see the number of untriaged defects we have per team, so that we can actually go on and say, don't solve a defect without triaging, because then we don't know how to prioritize what needs to be cherry picked in. Something which is very important, and I want to make sure I talk about this here, is that teams should be involved in determining what metrics we want to measure. It's not a way of saying that this team did well and this team did not do well. It's more about understanding where the focus needs to be in trying to improve the engagement for the teams, what they're developing, and actually the deliverable for the client. So make sure you always work with the teams to make so that they're in agreement with what we're measuring. I have had feedback where people have said to me, you're creating these metrics, but nobody's reading them. Okay, nobody's reading them. Why aren't they reading them? What is it that they will find useful? A small thing we did was we actually started creating dashboards for their tech leads because they had so many tickets to keep an eye on. So these dashboards actually showed them these were the top critical and high defects that were being raised against their team for a said release, so they can quickly triage it. So it's small things like this that you can do that can help teams improve where they are. Another one was a lot of teams kept saying that we are writing lots of tests, yet the coverage was still low. Why? Because those endpoints which they were writing tests for were not being hit by other tests. So we actually created tickets and visualized that number, and then the QAs actually went in and wrote those gaps, wrote tests for those gaps. The last thing is it's really important to make sure that you have regular retrospectives about what we are measuring. Sometimes something which made sense last year may not be something which makes sense this year. For example, something I was measuring last year was the ratio of manual versus manual versus automated tests. That doesn't make sense this year for me, for my team specifically, basically because we had a big item in our roadmap where we specifically worked on writing automated tests, and that number has gone really low now of manual tests, and we know that we can actually churn out a release quite quickly. So there's no use for me to measure that metric anymore. In the end, I want to make sure that all of you understand that quality is subjective. It varies from what the CEO thinks about to what you think about to what your teams think about. Make sure you start by creating a vision and you select some metrics and you start measuring it. And also keep an open mind that what you're measuring will probably evolve over time. It's not what will remain. A lot of the feedback you may get about the quality of your product is that I find that I have to click too many times to get this feature running. That's how that user feels about their product. It's not necessarily that that feature is of bad quality. So make sure you work with your teams to determine what is it that you would be willing to work on when it comes to qualitative measurement of quality rather than quantitative. I really hope some of this information has been useful for you. I know I've just rushed through a lot of this information. Please feel free to ping me on Twitter or LinkedIn if you want to have further discussions. And thank you very much for your time on this. Thank you.